Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
Greetings, friends, and this is Dr. Blair Ritchie, Executive Director of the International Student Foundation, welcoming you to another episode of Legends in Leadership. I'm joined today by my co-hosts from the Carrington Group, Tyler Tallman, Jason Smith. Guys, good to be together.
It's good to be here. We got episode 53.
We got a treat today for the 53rd.
We
do.
Yeah,
wonderful guest, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and before we get to him, though, we always like to do a little trivia question that kind of sparks some interest in some other types of leaders who have, like us, kind of started with humble beginnings and risen up to make a difference in their world. So, Tyler, I guess you're teed up today?
I am. No pressure for the Lieutenant Colonel, but this is the only time in show history that I'm going to say it's 100% chance that he's going to know the answer.
Oh, yeah.
So,
no pressure. I'm set up for failure.
Take your money. Yeah.
But a military theme today, only fitting. Today's legendary leader was one of the great military generals of our modern era. He was born into a military family and spent a good portion of his adolescence in Iran, where he developed a lifelong interest in Middle Eastern culture. As a boy, he wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, and he did. So as a cadet at the U.S. Military Academy, he volunteered to serve in Vietnam, cutting short a teaching assignment at West Point. During his second tour in Vietnam, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He returned from duty as one of the most highly decorated officers, earning silver and bronze stars along with a Purple Heart. After serving on the command group for the invasion of Grenada, he rose to become a lieutenant general and eventually was named commander of U.S. Central Command. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, our legendary leader became the face of Operation Desert Storm. His aggressive, decisive leadership earned him celebrity status, complete with welcome home parades down Broadway and in the nation's capital. So who is this legendary leader? I'll be back at the end of today's program with the answer.
All right. Well, I think you're right about our guest. Probably might be a softball to him. But
I hope. I maybe.
Well, I mean, it would have to be Norman Schwarzkopf.
Yeah, okay.
There you go.
Okay, there you go.
For the first time in history, we have the answer to our question before the end of the show.
Before the end of the show, that's right. Well, you're right. It's great to welcome.
Well, look, I was kind of cheating because I
served under him.
Yeah, I was in Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So that was a softball.
Do you remember your boss?
Oh,
yes, I do remember.
That's right. There you go. You got to do that.
Storm and Norman.
There you go. There you go. Well, Colonel West, great to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to introduce you to our audience. For some who might not know you, you describe yourself as a Christian constitutional conservative, and I can't tell you how much respect I have for all three of those C's in your your biography. But Colonel West did serve in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, the Iraq War as well, and after 22 years of distinguished and decorated service, retired from the United States Army. Landed in Florida, where you were elected to the United States House of Representatives from Florida's 22nd District. Spent a couple years at D.C. at the wonderful...
I'm still trying to get the swamp smell off of me.
Yeah, well, if they hadn't redistricted you might still be in there today, right? So, but anyhow, 5 years ago, came to Texas. And,
came back to Texas because my last duty assignment was Fort Hood, Texas.
Nice.
That's where I retired out of.
Very good. Very good. Well, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
Distinguished author as well, and has a forthcoming book maybe we can talk about eventually here on the podcast. We Can Overcome an American Black Conservative Manifesto. I heard you just recently guest hosting the Mark Davis Show. And at the end of the show, you just talked about how grateful you were for our country, to live in a country where an African-American boy growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, could go on to experience all that you've experienced.
It's incredible.
And I just become a fan on Fox News as well, and so I get to hear you here on the local radio shows as well. And I thought it'd be fun to go back to your boyhood. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, and you grew up in neighborhoods where Dr. Martin Luther King preached. And talk a little bit about some of those early influences, especially from a leadership standpoint. What formed some of your ideas about leadership early on?
Well, the thing is, in 1961, when I was born in Atlanta, I was born in Hugh Spalding Hospital. And at that time, Hugh Spalding was a blacks-only hospital. So, when you start from there and you grow up in the neighborhood, the community that produced Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when your elementary school is right across the street from Ebenezer Baptist Church, nice. When every day you're walking down Auburn Avenue and you go past, Ebenezer, Southern Christian Leadership Council, you see the cradle of, black businesses and corporations. You learn to box, swim, and play basketball at the historic Butler Street YMCA there. You just started to develop those understandings of what strong, principled, manly leadership was about, because that's what surrounded you. That was a part of the old Fourth Ward neighborhood, because there was a pride about the fact that was Dr. King's neighborhood, and the men, carried that legacy, and they talked to you about those stories. And my mother raised me with a very simple principle that said a man must stand for something or else he'll fall for anything. And that was something that was consistently hammered into me. And my dad was a corporal in World War II. He was born and raised over in South Alabama, but early enough he jumped the Chattahoochee River and grew up in South Georgia, to my liking. And Mom was from South Georgia also. But the interesting thing is, when I think about leadership, I think about my dad. And I think about a man that went to fight for a country that did not afford him all the rights and privileges did, him.
Yeah, that's true.
And the amazing thing was that from that man that was a corporal in the United States Army in World War II, through North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, at the age of 15, he sat me down and challenged me to be the first officer in our family, because my older brother was a lance corporal in the United States Marine Corps. He served in Vietnam. And what an incredible thing that, you would have a dad that would pass on that mantle, that responsibility, that type of challenge to you. And so from an early, aspect of my life, you started to, study and try to understand, what is leadership all about? Because I started in high school junior ROTC as a sophomore in Henry Grady High School. And so even there, you had men like Lieutenant Colonel Pagonis, Major Heredia, Master Sergeant Buchanan, Sergeant First Classmate Michael, who were my ROTC instructors from 76 to 79. I'll never forget them. And that's the reason why I can be sitting here with you all today, because of those incredible, strong foundations that I got in a home with a mother and father, with a community around me, and with great examples of strong leadership.
So it sounds like at an early age, you were swimming with the current around these strong leadership and principled people. Do you feel like the current changed at some point?
The current has definitely changed, and that's a great point, Jason, that you just brought up, because in 1961, a two-parent household in the black community was between 75 and 77%.
Wow.
Today it's 24%.
Wow.
And you can trace it back to, the policies that came out of the Johnson administration, Great Society policies that said that if a woman has a child out of wedlock, the government will provide her a check, no matter how many children she has out of wedlock. But the caveat was that there could not be a working man in the home. And so you destroyed the thing that was really the foundation for so many young people, boys and girls like myself, that strong two-parent household, to be able to have those parents there. I learned about stocks and investments and things like that. Dad would sit down and challenge me to do the box scores of the Atlanta Braves baseball games. Hank Aaron comes up, and he went 3 for 5. What was his percentage, hitting percentage for that game? And so I really got interested in numbers, because, to me it was fascinating. I learned more about the Atlanta Braves than just sitting there and watching them play. But then the next thing I know, he goes to a different section of the newspaper, and this is the business and stock section. And he starts to teach me about money and investing money and the return on investment and things of this nature. And so when you don't have that type of leadership in the home, then think about what you get And when you look across all the inner city communities in the United States of America, that's what you see. And it's a sad thing. So yeah, I was swimming with the current at the time, but now kids like me would be swimming against the current.
And in many cases are even ridiculed or bullied
horrifically
for wanting to get out.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think that we're starting to see a trend where the young people are saying, I don't want to go with that tide.
Yeah.
And
That's
really and truthfully, you get stronger when you swim against the tide.
Mm-hmm.
You really do.
Since you brought up inner city, I've listened to you speak quite a bit about your philosophy for what it would take to fix some of our issues there. So talk a little bit about that and kind of what your plan would be to fix some of the issues that we're talking about.
Well, sticking with the title of our podcast here, it takes the right type of leadership. It takes the right type of leadership that says we want people to become victors and not make people into victims. But too often we have folks that, go along this mantle of saying that they're leaders in communities and whatever, but all they're looking to do is they're seeking to have people that are subservient to their own goals and objectives themselves. And, I think it was Frederick Hayek, I believe, that wrote the book, The Road to Serfdom. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what we're on right now. You have an instance where people are trying to make individual serfs to serve them and their capacity in these elected positions. So that's the most critical thing, is we have to have leaders that care more about, others than they do about themselves. And I think that's the basis of Christian leadership. Mm-hmm. When, Jesus said the Son of Man came to serve and not to be served. So that's critical. Then we have to restore quality education in these inner city communities. No one should be relegated to going to a failed school. My parents made that choice for me. I did not go to the public schools in the neighborhood, C.W. Hill and John Hope. I went to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic School. And the foundation that I got there, people look at, I can't write in print because my mother made me learn cursive before I even hit the first grade. Mm-hmm. And what was the purpose of learning cursive? It's discipline. And it's a creative ability and to be able to control your hands. So it's education is important. Educational freedom for parents is important. Then I think we got to do, small business entrepreneurship. Like I said, when I would walk down Auburn Avenue, I saw doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, I saw small businesses, I saw all of this, black owned. But now we're struggling to see that, but at least we have policies coming about with opportunity zones that are trying to reinstate that. And I think that gets us going back in the right track. Now, it's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
Because where we have gotten now has been the product of the past 50, almost 55 years. But at least we got to take the first step. And the first step starts with responsible servant leadership. And I think that the people have to start understanding that they need to have individuals that aren't going to tell them what they think they want to hear, but tell them what they need to hear. Mm. That's the difference between a politician and a statesman.
It's so relevant for us at ISF because at ISF we work with kids who are aging out of foster care. Mm-hmm. You talk about the breakdown of the home, 25 million children today growing up in fatherless homes. Crazy, isn't it?
That's a huge epidemic. I mean, I don't think a lot of people pay attention to that. No. But that has an incredible consequence for our society when you don't have those strong role models in the home.
I mean, just the there's the emotional side of this, but we forget about just the practicality of it costs us $65,000 a year on average to house an inmate in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
And we've got what's the percentage of kids that end up incarcerated?
Well, that's what's scary, yeah. Some states actually base their prison population on how many kids are in foster care because so many of the foster care kids when they age up.
Yeah, yeah. And it shouldn't be that way. Yeah. I mean, we should be creating those, again, like I said, the path for, each young person to be a victor and not be a victim. And that's something that has to start out very early on.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how your journey would speak to some of our ISF community is very diverse because foster care kids are white, black. It affects all races, but a good percentage of our students in ISF are African American. And talk a little bit about what you would say to our ISF students who are just starting out now as in pursuing college degrees.
Yeah, sure.
And give a little. The reason I say that is we're creating a library of leadership stuff for our students.
Well,
and,
one of the things the military teaches you is your 3x5 cards, and you always carry those note cards around. And for me, I have what I call the 5 C's of leadership. And the 5 C's of leadership are: first is courage. You have to have the courage to stand alone sometimes and not do it, as you just mentioned, Jason, go with that flow, go with that current. You also have to have competence. And competence means that you have to educate yourself. I used to tell my soldiers the most important weapon that you have is not your M4 or your 9mm or our howitzers. The most important weapon you have is what's between your ears. Mm-hmm. And you've got to study to show thyself approved, which is what it says in the Bible. The other thing is commitment. You have to find a core set of principles and values that you're committed to. But then the other thing is you have to be convicted. You have to have that conviction that no matter what comes about, you're going to stay committed to those core principles and values. And the last thing is character. And I always, have told soldiers and my 2 daughters that character and integrity means that you do what is right when no one is watching. That's the important part. And so that's it. I would just tell them courage, confidence, commitment, conviction, character. Those are the key aspects of becoming a leader.
Great stuff. Great stuff. My daughter went to the Air Force Academy, graduated in 2004.
Oh, why would you say
I know. Well, she wanted to fly, baby. She wanted to fly.
She could have gone into the Army.
She was a Zoomie, yeah.
She could have gone to the Army. I mean, we got Apache helicopters and all that kind of stuff. We got cool stuff.
I watched.
She saw too much Top Gun.
Yeah, I guess. Tyler knows her, so that's probably pretty
Probably very accurate.
But anyhow, I watched. I think the military is one of those leadership intensive, places.
Without a doubt.
And the academies, and there seemed to be kind of a break you down to build you up kind of a thing, and understanding followership to understand leadership. Give us a little bit of perspective from the inside of
You
a
cannot
military.
be a good leader unless you're first a good follower. And that's one of the core principles. And what the military does is that's what basic training is all about. It is about taking that individual and saying it's not about you. It's about the team. And we are going to strip you of believing that you're an individual, and we're going to make you part of something that is bigger than yourself. The old Spartan way of life, at the age of 9 years old, the young Spartan boy was taken away from his family. And he was put into their training camp, which was called the Agoge. Tough, brutal, hard training. But it was all about breaking them down and preparing them to be a warrior. And that's why the Spartans were the most fierce and feared warriors in ancient military history. But the interesting thing is that the mother was the one, of course, that had to give up her son. And the mother was the one that gave the young Spartan warrior his shield. And she told him, Spartan, here is your shield. Come back being born upon it or bearing it.
Wow.
And that was their code of no surrender, no retreat. So again, it comes back to the home. But yeah, that's what the military does. And I will tell you that, I've seen some interesting transformational, of young people that, will come in and from bad backgrounds. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, they will tell you in a heartbeat, just like I just repeated my 4 high school ROTC instructors. They'll never forget their drill sergeant. They'll never forget their first platoon sergeant. They'll never get that person that became that which was missing in their life. An example of strength, of discipline, and of character. And I think that's what our young people need. Now, some people will say, well, do we need to have, mandatory service in the military? Do we need to bring back a draft or something? I say no. But we do need to have some type of service for our young people to understand there's more to life than their dadgum iPhone, okay? But the military should be reserved for our best, because that's where you want your best. And that's why we have been successful, even with the volunteer military, because young people are coming in, they're raising their right hand to say, I'm committed to something that is greater than myself. And if we ever get to a point, we're trying to do this, but if we ever get to the point where we try to align the military with our civilian society, then our military is not going to be as effective as it is.
Right.
Reminds me, my dad, nearly 60 years later, still remembers his rifle serial number just right off the back of his head.
Yeah.
And I haven't asked him the name of his drill sergeant, but I'm going to now.
Yeah, those things get drilled into your head. You're absolutely right. I bet he might if he can't tell you his exact name, he can tell you everything about him.
So you have a book coming out in February,
Yep.
An American Black Conservative Manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about what can we expect in the book?
Well, you know, the theme of it is, you know, we can overcome. And what I wanted to do is, I hate we shall overcome. Shall is a very passive verb. Can is an active verb.
Okay.
And instead of us sitting back and hoping or, you know, being passive about it, we need to talk about how we can overcome. And so what the book does is look at the history of the black community in the United States of America, because the black community is conservative in nature. We don't talk to the black community about that, about principles and values. And that's what it does. It looks at, you know, faith, it looks at family, it looks at education, it looks at small business entrepreneurship, it looks at service to the nation. And it, you know, we look at all of those examples, you know, going back from the Revolutionary War all the way up to modern day, and just talk about, you know, where we were, how do we get off track, and then how can we get back on track to reestablish, you know, what was a very strong and proud community that survived some of the most horrific periods of time in this country.
So it sounds like a very ground up approach.
Absolutely.
Of an individual approach. I'm curious, how does that contrast with what you experienced in D.C.? You know, what is it that we're not seeing behind the theater, the performance that we get in news bites, and what really is going on in D.C. as compared to more the local grassroots community?
Well, I think the most important thing we have to understand is the people in elected positions are there because we allowed them to be there. And so there's an incredible responsibility upon the individual American citizen is to, you know, hold precious that thing that we call a vote. Because what you are doing is you're giving people authority. You're allowing people to be your voice, your representative. And first and foremost, you need to study and examine yourself and understand what your principles and values are before you just willy-nilly give it to someone. And I think that, you know, as Benjamin Franklin said, it's a republic if you can keep it.
Right.
And so many of us don't understand what it means to live in a constitutional republic, first and foremost, coming back to education. And then the other thing is that we don't, I guess we, what do they call it when you just send your responsibility to someone else. You abdicate. You abdicate that to someone else, and then the next thing you know, they are not governing, they're ruling over you. So I think that what has happened in Washington, D.C. is exactly what our founding fathers did not want for us to have: career politicians. They wanted us to have citizen legislators. They wanted us to have servant leaders that, you know, went and did their work up there in Washington, D.C., and they came back to their own profession. Right. Whatever that profession was. But they did not see their profession was being a politician. So I think that first and foremost, we need to have an awakening within the United States of America, not just at the local levels, city council, school boards, very important. Most important elected position in the country, school board. But we need to start looking at the folks that we're sending up to Washington, D.C. to say, are they really truthfully representing the interests of America, my interests, our fundamental principles and values? And when we're not teaching those fundamental principles and values, it's very easy for someone to come along and just say, this, that, the other. Right. Because most people don't know. And so that's why, in my other breast pocket, I never leave home without it, is this. It's the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And, you know, doctor, you want to look at it, I mean, it's falling apart. It's all
well read.
That's why it's got that's why it's got the clip on it.
Awesome.
And it's you know, highlighted and everything.
Yeah, it is.
Because that's our rule of law. That's the bond of who we are as citizens in this constitutional republic. And if we're not carrying that around, if we're not studying it, and if we're not teaching that to subsequent generations, then someone can come along and they can fundamentally transform your country into whatever they think they want to have it.
Where did you get that love for the Constitution? When did that start? That kind of commitment for you at least on your journey?
Well, that started on 31 July 1982 at the University of Tennessee when I stood with my dad at my right shoulder, my mom at my left shoulder, and I raised my right hand. I said that I, Alan Bernard West, swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any purpose of evasion or mental reservation, so help me God. My dad took that oath. Yeah. My older brother took that oath. My nephew, who's a major in the United States Army right now, took that oath. So that's how it starts.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It's amazing. We're not a political show, but it would be remiss of me to, with where we are right now as a country. I'll tell you, it keeps me awake at night. I was actually on an elevator with a gentleman yesterday, and he used the word scary times. And I'd have to agree with that in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, without going on a long tangent about that, but what is your perspective of where we are today, with news coming out this morning that we're formally filing documents to impeach our president? What is your perspective on all of that, and where are we headed with this thing?
We are
election?
in an ideological civil war in the United States of America, and it comes down to the difference between constitutional conservatism, which believes that the individual is sovereign, they have rights and liberties, and opposed to the progressive socialism that believes that the institution of government is preeminent over the individual. And that's the challenge that we face. And when we have people that are going out and they're saying that you don't have a right to pursue your happiness, we have a right to try to guarantee a happiness to you. And we will determine what your rights are based upon an ideological agenda. So we say that we will give you this free because it aligns with our ideological agenda. When we are sitting right now and we're having our third Supreme Court case on the Second Amendment, to me that's absurd. Why are we having an argument about the Second Amendment? What is it that is so hard to understand about the very simple words, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed?
It protects the others.
But the fact that it does not coincide with a certain ideological agenda, then that means that it has to be something that is undermined and attacked. When we are living in a country where we can turn on the television and we can see young people in the streets of Hong Kong marching, carrying our flag, singing our national anthem, but yet we have young people here in the United States of America that are speaking out against our flag, believe that we should have open borders, which means that you don't even believe in the sovereignty of this constitutional republic. That's where we have a problem. And that problem has been perpetrated throughout our education system, which is no longer about education, it's about indoctrination. So I think that it is very important that we give, we were talking before we got started about college football. I love college football. I grew up down south. I was born and raised in Georgia. I went to the University of Tennessee. It's all about the SEC, baby. But college football is about two things, blocking and tackling. And everything that you think about in life is about basic fundamentals. I don't care what it is. It's about basketball, baseball. It's about business, whatever. It's about some basic fundamentals. And when you get away from those basic fundamentals, you fail. And I think that we have a philosophy that has never been successful anywhere in the world, a philosophy of governance that is getting us away from our basic fundamentals. And we're not going to be successful if we're not just doing the blocking and tackling of a constitutional republic. So again, I think that that's why we have this schism, this ideological civil war. It's not about Republican or Democrat. It's all about how do you see the relationship of the individual to the institution of government. And coming back to leadership, when you have folks that are sitting up there and they're trying to rule over you instead of govern, that's the end state that we are facing right now.
I appreciate you sharing that. Great words. And what are you focused on now? I know you're hitting the road this afternoon to go speak. And
yeah, I'm going down to Lampasas, Texas. I'm back down by Fort Hood where my last duty assignment was. I'm running for the chairmanship of the Texas Republican Party, and I think that when you talk about Texas, you're talking about a nation, a state that leads this nation. When you talk about how great America is, it's because of this Lone Star State. When you look at the economy, oil and gas industry, the military, the world's largest military installation is in Texas. The oil and gas industry and what it's done to revolutionize, us being now energy independent, that's all coming out of Texas, hydraulic fracturing. When you look at the fact that you have 10% of Fortune 500 corporate headquarters in Texas, that tells you something. And so we've got to, once again remind people about why 185 men stood there on the ramparts of the Alamo for 13 days, led by a 26-year-old.
Wow. Amazing. You call it the Alamo effect.
It's the Alamo effect, absolutely.
Well, you described it as a war we're waging right now, and you're still a warrior. We appreciate your service.
Thank you.
Both in the United States Army as well as even continuing on. Keep, as they say, fighting that good fight. Right?
I will.
and appreciate you being with us. So we did start out with a little trivia that someone who served under the answer kind of gave us already. So we're going to celebrate
Storm and Norman. That's what
Norman
the Colonel
Schwarzkopf.
said.
Yeah.
Norman Schwarzkopf.
One of his quotes that I remember was that the real heroes aren't the ones who send people into battle, but it's the ones who go into the battle.
That's right.
And you know, it goes back to that idea of leadership and servanthood. That sometimes we get that we forget where why leaders lead and what the essence of that leadership is.
You know, William Barrett Travers was not in someplace else. He was right there on those walls.
Yeah.
And that's what leadership is about. Hannibal, Leonidas, Alexander the Great, all the great leaders, led from the front.
Yep. So how can our listeners stay in touch with you?
Sure. TheOldSchoolPatriot.com. That's my website. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook there. And then also Texas.com, West4Texas.com. That's our website for the chairmanship race for the Republican Party of Texas.
Great. Best of luck.
Great. Good luck with that.
Thank you, guys.
Well, when we started this podcast journey, they said, leave them wanting more. And we did that, didn't we? Because I want more. I would love
Talk
to
for
keep
another
going.
30 minutes easily.
But our time is up, and we'll call it a wrap. And so on behalf of our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, thank you for being here. My co-hosts, this has been a great podcast. Hope it's a blessing to everybody that listens. And we'll just sign off with the words of John Quincy Adams. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by the Carrington Group. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. To learn more about the Carrington Group, visit their website at www.carringtonfo.com or Google Carrington Group, Dallas, Texas. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphaned youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. To learn more about ISF, visit their website at isfsite.org or Google International Student Foundation to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.